I've been shooting photography for probably the last 12 years, and 8 of which professionally. And one thing for at least the first 4 that always got me stressed out was figuring out how to light with strobes. I don't know why. I'd done professional video lighting. I knew the principles of lighting, but for some reason not being able to see it in real time really freaked me out. I couldn't quite close that gap. So today, I want to start off with one setup that is very achievable for anybody out there with a camera that has the availability to use a speed light and a remote trigger. This is a one light setup. You can do it with a portrait backdrop like I have behind me, or you could use it with a backdrop that is just whatever your location is. It'll work either way. Super simple. I think if you haven't shot portraits with strobes before, you'll be very surprised at how easy this setup is to attain. Real quick, I'll run through what I'm using just so you know what it is. It's a Godox XT1 remote trigger for my Godox speed light. The speed light I'm using is the Godox TT685C because I shoot on a Canon camera. This is a great speed light. You by no means need to purchase a kit like this. You could get a cheaper kit. I used some flashes from Altera Photo that worked really well. Yongyo, if that's how you pronounce that, has some pretty decent speed lights. My setup for this portrait is with the light 45 degrees, frame right, raised up about 1.5 feet higher than my height, angled down. I'm gonna have my speed light set. We'll dial in those output settings once we get there. But I just have a speedlight bracket on top of that stand that has the umbrella mount going through that, and the speedlight's clamped inside that bracket. Real quick, we're gonna take a couple shots. I'll let you see what that looks like, and then we'll kind of break down what we did. By now you've seen 3 or 4 of the portraits and how they turned out. I did 2 lighting setups. The first being what we talked about on camera before, which is with that light 45 degrees off axis to my left, camera right. And then I did a second setup where it was more of a split, 50-50 kind of dramatic portrait. Please ignore my modeling abilities. They are not the best, but you work with what you got. So on the 50-50 split setup, all I did was rotate that light around another 45 degrees or so that it's almost 90 degrees on my left side, directly next to me in the frame. It really just splits that right down the middle so you can see the shadows on my right side of my face and the light portion on the left side of my face. And I wanted to note, halfway through this, when I was taking these shots, I noticed that I was getting some fill, and I had some light on in the room to help assist with my camera's autofocus, otherwise it would have just been a black garage. But I had a full stop of silk that I was running my video light through for the talking head portion, and I left that up, and I was getting fill on the side of my face. And usually, depending on the output of your video lights, they don't impact too much the strobes. There's usually a higher output on the strobe than I have on my video light, so it doesn't impact it very much. For this case, I noticed that was filling me in, so if you wanted this to be more dramatic and you noticed you were getting some fill on that dark side of your face, check out what is on the side of you, whether it's white and there is light bouncing back from that, or if you have another light on in the room, perhaps you could dim that down. That is a big thing to keep in consideration when shooting with strobes. And again, that is one of the challenges of shooting with a flash or a strobe to begin with, is that you can't exactly see what's going on in real time. But the cool thing about this is I do think that it trains you really well to pick up on the qualities of light and how light interacts within a space. So I would highly suggest that if you haven't done this, to just play around, especially if you already have a speed light in your kit. So real quick, we're gonna head back out to my garage. I'm gonna walk you through the rough setup that I have going on there for where the equipment is, what I'm using, how it's set up, and then we'll jump back in here to talk settings and just final thoughts on this one light portrait. Real quick, on the GoPro view, I want to show you kind of roughly what my setup was. For the traditional style of portraits, I shot with the speed light off to my left at about 45 degrees. Here's where I'm standing. I'm about 5 feet away from the camera. You can kind of see camera and that speed light with the umbrella off there. For the ones that were a little bit more sighty, a little more of a split in the lighting, I just took this light and moved it basically directly to my side. So it was like pretty much a 50-50 split. Like here I am, and it is basically, if I'm looking forward, right on the other side of my face. And that helps you get that really contrasty side lit type of thing. Real quick, I'm gonna show you the setup for the X-T1. It just sits right in here on the hot shoe. You can ignore these settings here. I think we actually shot on like a quarter power for output. We just use this basically to trigger the light. I didn't use it to control my actual output. You can. I just, since I was so close to the strobe, it was easier to just grab it and change it on the fly. My strobe is here in this flash bracket. It does have a Bowens mount on it, which is super handy if you want to use a softbox with it, which I have done a lot before. You can see some of the settings in there, but again, these have probably been tweaked around a little bit. And then that umbrella mount just goes right there in the bottom. And then one last thing, since we were doing it out here and had a little talking head, my lighting setup is a full stop of silk clamped up just to the ceiling in my garage. And I have a newer panel LED light running off of a couple MPF batteries behind that. Not the brightest output, not the most awesome light, but it works really well for this kind of thing, and it's super fast to set up, which is great for me. All right, we're gonna get out of here. I've already recorded this once and didn't realize that my audio wasn't running. So we're gonna finish up and get some supper, right? High five. Thanks for helping, dude.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have got an image pulled up here. You will see that I did have to do a tiny bit of work in post, mostly because the width of my garage doesn't suit the full size of the backdrop, so you can see some of the clamps in the shot. Sometimes you can see some of the cabling in the garage in the shot that I had to paint out, but it was super quick and easy, and if you're proficient at all in Photoshop, you can take care of that. And one great way to avoid that is to just set up in a place that is large enough for your backdrop to cover the entirety of the back frame. I'm working with the best setup that I have. If I were to shoot these in my house, my toddler would probably be tearing down the backdrop as I was doing it. So you make do with what you got, and then you fix what you can in post. Going through the settings quick, I have ISO 100, I'm at f10, and shutter is at 1/125th of a second. A couple things I want to note: I try and stay at 100 ISO, which is the base ISO of my camera. That's just for noise, and generally it seems like the images come out a lot cleaner at that base ISO. My aperture is set to f10 for a couple reasons. As I mentioned prior, I didn't have the backdrop fully stretched, so there was some pleating and some wrinkles that were there, and being at f10, it really stopped down so that went completely black, so you can't really see those. And f10 also is a good spot for getting the entirety of me in focus. These were shot on my 18-55 kit lens on my Canon camera. I wanted the 18-55 because I was shooting video and I wanted to get the variety of space. Usually for something like this, I might look at something like a 50mm or an 85 if you're on a full frame. I was at 55mm on these. That focal length seems to be pretty flattering to the face, so that helps in those situations. And for typical aperture, if you're not trying to use it to stylistically change your backdrop, I would be between 5.6 and like f8 usually on a single portrait. This just ensures that you don't end up with somebody with like a soft nose or the tips of their ears soft. It keeps everything nice and sharp in focus. And finally, my shutter speed on this really came down to the combination of the aperture and ISO settings that I wanted. I'm fortunate enough in this situation that I'm using a high-speed sync flash. Usually 1/125th of a second, you wouldn't have too much of an issue with your shutter creeping into the exposure with your strobe, but if you do not have a high-speed sync strobe, and you bump up much beyond 1/125th of a second, you will start to see the shutter in your images. All that basically is you will end up with a portion of your image, usually at the bottom, where the shutter actually shows up in the exposure because of the way the strobe interacts with the exposure. So if the strobe can't fire quickly enough to have a shutter speed that is quicker than this speed, you start to see that shutter appear in your exposure, which I'm assuming you don't want. I did some minimal work in post, like I said, mostly just painting out clamps and other things in the background if they showed up. And I think I did some very minor contrast adjustments to the image just to kind of get them to where I like to see them. Another thing that I did use here, since I was doing a self-portrait, the Canon 80D has a application where you can wirelessly control it through the Wi-Fi on your phone. If you're doing self-portraits, that's super handy. If you're taking portraits of clients or models or your friends, probably don't need that because you're going to be behind the camera. So that's it on the settings side. Real simple, real easy. You know, there's a little bit of gear involved in this one, but not much. You know, a couple $100 worth of stuff, and you can get a very professional looking portrait, so nothing fancy here. And this is something that start to finish I probably got done in about an hour as far as the photography portion of this, so it's very achievable. If you were like I was and anxious about getting into flash photography and didn't really understand how it worked, I hope that this can encourage you to break through that boundary. You've just got to be willing to try a couple times and fail a couple times and figure it out, and you know, that's really how you learn anything. So thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you. If you've somebody that's been subscribed with me for a little while, you are amazing. I have got a bunch of different things planned for 2023. Not all of them are photo and video related, but I hope that they bring you some entertainment and value anyway. And I look forward to continuing to just make stuff for you here. If you like this, feel free to throw me the thumbs up down there or subscribe if you haven't. I will see you guys on the next one.